wake me up to another good morning, time to go.
Are you ready to explore God's wild and wonderful world? Welcome to the Nat Theo podcast. I'm your host, Erin Lynham. I'm a certified master naturalist, Bible teacher, and author, and I am so excited to dive into God's written word, the Bible, and His created world with you. Have you ever listened to or felt your own heartbeat? Maybe at the doctor's office, you were allowed to use a stethoscope to listen to your heart. It is an amazing sound. But what exactly is happening as our hearts beat all day, every day? Today, we are learning all about how God designed our hearts to do very important jobs that keep us alive. This episode is part of our Wonderfully Made series, where we are diving into God's designs in the human body. In earlier episodes, we discovered the incredible, tiny, busy cities inside of our cells and the important code called DNA, which gives instructions for building our bodies. God spared no detail in making us. This is why the psalmist says in Psalm 139:14, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Today we are learning from a doctor about God's designs in the human heart. A medical doctor is someone who has studied and been trained to understand how God created our bodies. Along with Dr. Matthew Sleeth, I also learned about the human body from another doctor who helped write the Human Anatomy and Physiology curriculum for Apologia. I was so amazed as I read the sections on the human heart and could see with colorful pictures and diagrams exactly how the heart works. Apologia does a wonderful job of taking big, sometimes complicated systems and describing them in a way my kids and I can understand and remember. And what I love most is that Apologia always points back to our Creator God and gives Him the rightful credit for all these incredible designs. Learn all about the human heart and the wonderful ways God made you with Apologia's Human Anatomy and Physiology courses for elementary through high school grades at apologia.com. Yesterday, we heard from Dr. Matthew Sleeth, a doctor who worked in emergency rooms, and he shared his incredible story of coming to believe in and follow Jesus after he stole a Bible from the hospital he worked at. Matthew shared how that decision to follow Jesus changed how he helped others and how he worked as a doctor. Today, Matthew is going to help us, from a doctor's perspective, to understand how God designed a very important organ in our bodies, the human heart. Here's our trail map.
Are you ready?
We will learn what is the cardiovascular system and what is the heart made of. We will see what important jobs the heart does and how does blood from our hearts help our cells. And finally, how can we love God with all of our heart? Make sure to stay tuned to the end of today's lesson for our new listener questions segment, where we will answer a question from one of our listeners. And if you would like to send a question in, get permission and go to erinlynham.com/ask. All right, listeners, here is our trivia question. How many times does a human heart beat per minute? Take a guess and we will find out at the end of today's lesson. I am so glad to welcome Dr. Matthew Sleeth back to Nat Theo. If you haven't yet listened to his story from our bonus episode that aired the day before this one, make sure you take time to listen right now or after this lesson. Matthew Sleeth worked as an emergency room doctor before resigning to teach, preach, and write about faith and health. He and his wife, Nancy, run Blessed Earth, an organization helping people learn about and take care of God's creation. Matthew has written several books, including two that changed my life: Reforesting Faith, which is about trees in the Bible, and 24/6, about Sabbath living and rest. His wife, Nancy, also wrote a book that I absolutely love called Almost Amish: One Woman's Quest for a Slower, Simpler, More Sustainable Life. You can find links for their books and organization in our show notes. Okay, let's welcome Dr. Matthew Sleeth back to the show. Well, yesterday we heard from Dr. Matthew Sleeth, a doctor who worked in emergency rooms, and he shared his incredible story of coming to believe in and follow Jesus after stealing a Bible from the hospital that he worked in. Matthew shared how that decision to follow Jesus changed how he helped others and worked as a doctor. And today, Matthew is going to help us from a doctor's perspective to understand how God designed a very important organ in our bodies, the human heart. Welcome, Matthew. I am so glad to have you back on Nat Theo.
Great to be with you.
So, Matthew, let's dive right into God's design of the human heart. Can you please explain to us what is the cardiovascular system?
The cardiovascular system consists of the heart, and the heart is an organ that's about the size of a fist. If you're a little child, you have a little fist, that's about the size of your heart. This is about the size of my heart. And it dwells right behind the breastbone, the sternum here, and it is a pump. And it's just one of the most magnificent pieces of machinery on the planet. I'm about 70 years old, and my heart has been beating since before I was born. The human heart starts to beat, or the tissue begins to beat just at a couple of weeks into a baby being formed. And by 6 weeks, it's actually beating and moving blood around. So it's been at work long before I realized I was even me. Mm-hmm. And if it's at my age, it's beat about 2.5 billion times.
Oh, wow.
And it's pumped. It's hard to get your head around these numbers. They're so big. But at my age, it's moved about 41 million gallons of blood.
Wow.
And to try to get that into some sense of something you could understand, in the Olympic swimming pool where they have the Olympics and they swim back and forth, contains about 500,000 gallons of water. And it would take 82 Olympic swimming pools to hold all the blood that my heart has pumped in this lifetime.
Oh,
it's just
my goodness.
amazing.
That is
and
amazing.
So why is it pumping that blood? What's the purpose of that? We should probably ask. And the heart wants to move the blood in two main areas. One is out into our body, our brain, our muscles, our stomach, that sort of thing. And it wants to move the blood out there, and it wants to get oxygen to our tissues. We run on oxygen. That's very interesting that the Bible says the life is in the blood, and it also calls the tree of life, a very, very important thing in the Bible, a tree of life. And both a tree and blood have the thing in common, is that they make or transport oxygen. And so we talked about science on the last show. These things are right there in the Bible that was written thousands and thousands of years ago, before anyone knew that a tree made oxygen or that our blood was moving it around. And so the heart wants to pump and move a blood cell around. Inside our bodies, inside my body, I have about 60,000 8,000 miles of blood vessels. And they go from the very largest ones, which are about the size of a garden hose, down to ones that are about a seventh the size of the width of a piece of hair. And so
Wow.
tiny, tiny blood vessels, and they're just everywhere. And they're bringing this blood with oxygen. And then they want to take away, that blood wants to carry the waste products away, which is carbon dioxide. When we do metabolism, which is turning food into energy, and then using that, we make carbon dioxide, which is a gas which our body doesn't like and it wants to get rid of. And so the blood is moved back. And then the other important thing that the heart does is to pump that blood that's high in carbon dioxide into the lungs, where we breathe in oxygen, and we have this cycle of exchanging the carbon dioxide, which is the gas we want to get rid of, for the oxygen, which is the gas that we run on.
Wow. You're not kidding when you say it's an incredible piece of machinery.
If you just took a single blood cell and you followed it around the body for the day, a single blood cell travels about 12,000 miles in one day, and that would be like
Wow.
going back and forth across the United States 4 times. Isn't that magnificent?
All inside of our body.
All inside of our bodies, all just
Wow.
keeping us alive. Now, one of the amazing things about the heart is it's a muscle, and it's a very powerful muscle. But unlike the other muscles in our body, like in our legs, or I move my arm, that type of thing, it works all on its own. I don't have to say beat heart
Yeah.
and have it beat. Those muscles are contracting all the time. There's an entire system to keep them going.
Wow. So the heart obviously does so much work. What is it made of? Can you kind of describe to us what it's made of and the different parts of the heart?
Sure. It's the outside of the heart. It sits in a sac called the pericardium, and it's a sac that allows the heart to beat, to get smaller and bigger. It's kind of lubricant in it. And then there's the endocardium, which is the lining of the heart where all the blood is going through. And that's very slippery so that the blood slides through easily. And then there's what's called the myocardium, and that is the heart muscle itself. And it just looks like a typical muscle. If you've seen a piece of steak, that's about what a heart looks like if it's uncooked. And yet when you zoom in with a microscope, you see that the heart muscles are some of the most orderly muscles in the body, and that they are loaded with what's called the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria. They're just loaded with those because they have to work and constantly. The heart never says I'm tired, never says give me a break. It's always working, which I think is one of the reasons that the heart is mentioned so much in the Bible. And we have that language today. It doesn't matter how far science has come. If you're hurt, you can say my heart is broken, or somebody is good-hearted, or they have a broken heart, or they've had a change of heart, and that type of things, because our hearts respond to emotions as well as the demands of we're running and we need to pump more blood and get more oxygen to our muscles. And so the heart is really the seat of where we register emotions often. We'll feel our heart speed up if we're scared or excited.
Mm.
It can slow down when we're calm, that type of thing.
Wow, how fascinating. So you talked about all these different jobs that the heart does and why it's so important in our bodies. And on one of our previous episodes for this series, Wonderfully Made, we talked about the cell, which you have mentioned a couple of times. And you mentioned just how much the cell travels through our body, carried by our blood, pumped by our heart. Can you just expound a little bit How does blood pumping from our hearts through our bodies, how does that serve our cells?
It's a great question. Well, the body has many, many different types of cells that have different tasks. And the red blood cell is a fairly unique cell in the body in that it has no nucleus in it. It is, but what it has is metal. And it has
Metal.
metal and it has iron in it that helps carry the oxygen. It's contained in a um, uh, an apparatus called hemoglobin, which is inside, and that it uses metal. It's amazing how this all works, but it uses a piece of metal to help carry the oxygen around. And so let's take a blood cell and take it into the lungs first. If I were to spread out my lungs, the surface area of my lungs on a flat surface to see how big they are, my lungs are almost the exact same size as a tennis court. And most people have
Whoa.
seen a tennis court.
And you're talking about, so let's just clarify our lungs, those are the organ that's going to take oxygen, air in, and then pump it back out of our bodies.
Correct.
And you're saying that laid out would be the size of a tennis court?
It's the size of a tennis court. Now I was watching about a year ago. Some people take care of tennis courts. I don't play tennis myself, but they were taking care of them, and it took them probably these were clay tennis courts, and it probably took them a half an hour to rake off the thing and put new lines and everything. We can cover that area with the blood and exchanging oxygen in 1 second. And if we are running, let's say, and we are breathing 60 times a second, that means that we are doing the equivalent of painting a tennis court 60 times in 1 minute. It's just
Wow.
fantastic. And that allows the oxygen that we're breathing in to get to the red blood cell. And I just have to say this. When the listeners have been to the doctor and the doctor places a stethoscope on their chest to listen to those lungs work, the doctor hears a very special word. And everyone can do this if you just take a big breath in and out of your nose. I'm saying the name of the Lord. It's Yahweh. And in the Bible, when God first breathes into Adam's nostrils, it's he breathes himself into Adam. It's the name Yahweh. And so every time you take a breath, you're really saying one of the Hebrew names of the Lord. It's lovely, I think. And so we say that. So now let's say we've got an oxygen on our blood cell, and it's going to move out into the body, and that needs to go to our brain, and that's one of the first places that a blood cell wants to get to is our brain, so we can think, and then our muscles. But the brain always takes priority. There's only one place that really takes priority over the brain, and people never think about this, but the heart muscle itself has to get its own oxygen, and it has special blood vessels that come down from the aorta. It's the big vessel coming out of the heart. It's the main one coming out, and so those blood vessels come and they surround the heart, and they're called the coronary arteries. Big coronary, as in coronation. They crown
Oh, wow.
the heart. So when we say the word coronary, we're really saying the word crown.
Wow.
And so and the oxygen goes out, and that's what we run on. That's the fuel that we run on. Our muscles wouldn't work without it. We need oxygen.
Wow. Well, you have made it very clear that the heart is a very important part of our body, a very detailed part of our body. And I'm sure as a doctor, And in our last episode, you alluded to this. It's just so incredible that God has helped scientists and doctors understand all these things, whether they acknowledge that it's God's designs or not. Like, I think about just all of the benefits that this knowledge gives to us and helps us, like doctors, to be able to serve people and do good, like you talked about yesterday. We had a really hard time in my family's story where we lost a family member when they were very young. And it was a really hard time for our family. And 7 of his organs were able to be donated to others. And I remember just thinking about his heart beating inside of someone else and our loss that God was helping us to grieve through and to heal from. We just thought about how God had brought good from it to allow others to live. And now just understanding the heart and how detailed it is, just to think about, that God led doctors to know how to do those operations, to give life, to do good. It's just incredible to think of that God designed all these things, and now he's helping us to understand them and use them for good.
And the Bible says that God wants to give us a new heart and a true heart. And so when we believe in God and follow him and follow the Bible, our heart literally changes over time, and our heart begins to be more like Christ, and it feels for other people in a way that, at least in my case, didn't do it before.
Yeah, absolutely. What a beautiful picture that really all of us who believe in God have received a new heart. Wow. Well, thank you, Matthew, for explaining this all to us from your perspective as a doctor, as someone who really understands it better than I did before. Thank you. I would like to close on a question that I like to ask all of our guests. Do you have a favorite memory in nature from your childhood?
That is so difficult because I have so many lovely memories of nature, but I think I'll tell you one. I grew up in a little place called Woodfield. It was in Maryland, and there were woods and fields and cows. And I used to love to go walking, and was very fortunate that I had lots of big farms I could go walk on, and not even ours. I could walk on all the neighbors' farms. And I remember a fall day walking where there was oak woods that came right up next to a field, and the wind came and just blew thousands of these beautiful golden leaves over the top of me and just kept going. It's one of the prettiest things, and I thought, I'm going to remember this forever, and I have.
And you have. Wow. And now you're sharing it with so many others. That's beautiful. Thank you. Well, Matthew, I will be sure to point everyone to your books that I have loved. They have so deeply impacted me, as well as your wife's book. I will put all those in the show notes. And I just want to thank you again for being with us yesterday and today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Listener, think about your heart. Think about it beating right now inside of you. Imagine the blood that it is pumping to your lungs to pick up oxygen, and then back to your heart, and then through your entire body to power so many other systems inside of you. What an incredible design. Do you know that the Bible talks a lot about our hearts? Now, when we read in the Bible about our heart, most often it's not talking about the physical organ pumping inside of us. Instead, the Bible talks about the heart as the deepest part of who we are. Consider these verses. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." In Psalm 51:10 we read, "Create in me a pure heart, God, and make my spirit right again." Proverbs 3:5 tells us, "Trust the Lord with all your heart, and don't depend on your own understanding." Do you think these 3 verses are talking about our physical, pumping heart inside of us? No. They are talking about our soul, the deep part of who we are, the part of us that makes us different from the rest of God's creation. You see, God designed most creatures with physical hearts to pump blood through their bodies, but God made humans unique and special in His creation. He gave us humans a soul, a part of us that will live forever in eternity. My kids and I are currently reading a book called The Ology by Marty Mikowski, and I want to read to you a beautiful piece of it that describes God making the first human, Adam, and how Adam was different from the animals that God had just made. So God made the animals, and then He made Adam. Listen closely to what comes next. But Adam soon became lonely, for none of the animals were, like him, made in the image of God. Adam could do things that animals could not. He could know God and worship Him. He could think up names, and he could be in charge of the animals. Adam could understand God's words. He could sing for joy, and he could love. Listener, after that, God created Eve as a partner for Adam so he would no longer be lonely. But do you see how God made humans different from animals? What did it say right at the end? Adam could love. Of course, our pets can enjoy us and want to be around us. My dog certainly does. But God created us humans with something unique and special. A soul that lasts forever and can know God. Our soul can connect with God and have a relationship with Him. When the Bible talks about guarding our heart, having a clean heart, and trusting God with our heart, it is talking about our soul. Listen to Matthew 22:37. Jesus answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind." Again, listener, do you think that this verse is talking about our physical beating heart inside of us? No, not exactly. It is talking about our soul. In fact, this verse says to love God with all our heart and all of our soul. Those 2 words for heart and soul in the original Greek language are similar. The Greek word for heart is cardia. It means the central part of something, including the center of the spiritual life or the inner person. The Greek word used for soul is suhe. It can mean the soul which lives forever. Why do you think Jesus would use both words? He was telling us to love God with all that we are. We can love God with our physical beating heart, His gift to us, by keeping our heart organ healthy. We can be active as we hike and explore outside and eat lots of good foods that God created us to eat. You see, when we keep our organ heart healthy, we can serve God better. And more importantly, we can love God with our whole heart, our soul, the deepest part of who we are. We can do this by learning more about God, by reading His Word and listening to programs like Nat Theo, by spending time in prayer and with others who love and follow God. We can serve God by following His plan for our lives and asking Him to show us what He wants us to do in life. These past 2 days, we have heard from Dr. Matthew Sleeth, who, after stealing a Bible and reading it cover to cover, decided to love and follow God with his whole heart. Matthew also helped us understand the design of our heart organ inside of us, which is God's gift to us that allows us to do so many amazing things in life. Listener, let's be Jesus followers who love God with our whole hearts. All right, it's time for our new listener questions segment. This listener questions segment is brought to you by Branch Basics non-toxic cleaning supplies. My family easily swapped out all of our cleaning supplies with a starter kit from Branch Basics. We love using their household cleaning solution, dish pods, and laundry detergent. In fact, we use their products every day. Switch over easily with their premium starter kit and save 15% using the code NATURE at branchbasics.com/nature or at the link in our show notes. Here is today's listener question.
Hi, my name is Levi. I'm 8 years old, and I like to know why octopuses have so many arms.
Levi, I love that you asked this question because recently I have been very fascinated by octopuses and spending a lot of time researching them. They certainly are unique in God's creation with their 8 arms. Octopus use their 8 arms mostly for feeding. Their 8 arms have suction cup-like structures on them that they use to grab food. And then they bring that food toward their mouth, which is called a beak. Do you want to know something kind of crazy about those 8 arms? Each arm has a mini brain of its own. It's not exactly like the master brain, like a brain we normally think about in the head. But each arm has a cluster of neurons. Those are the same type of cells found in the brain that we will be learning about next week. These mini brains in an octopus's arms are called ganglia. In a way, each arm can kind of think and act on its own, allowing the octopus to make a lot of different movements at the same time and do a lot of things at once, which makes sense because octopus are very smart. They can do things like solve puzzles and escape from small spaces. Thanks for your great question, Levi. Keep being curious about God's wild and wonderful world. And listeners, if you have a question that you would like to have answered on Nat Theo, get permission and head over to erinlynham.com/ask or the link in our show notes. Do you remember our trivia question? How many times does a human heart beat per minute? A human heart normally beats around 60 to 100 times every minute. However, professional athletes who use their hearts a whole lot when they're training and competing, their heart rate may be lower, around 40 beats per minute. Now it's your turn to explore. Research different creatures and find out how many times their hearts beat every minute. We just learned that the human heart beats around 60 to 100 times a minute. But did you know that a tiny hummingbird's heart beats around 1,200 times every minute? With permission and help, look up different creatures and learn how many times their hearts beat per minute. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this lesson, please take a moment to share it with a friend. And make sure to check out Dr. Matthew Sleeth's organization, Blessed Earth, and all of his books in the links in our show notes. Please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review Nat Theo wherever you listen. And until next time, keep exploring God's wild and wonderful world.